Hello YouTube! In this video I'm going to weigh in on the current ideological divide within the natural community, best illustrated by the recent clash between Revival Fitness and Geoffrey Verity Schofield, who both represent completely different groups within this natural community. On one hand, you have the Noble Natties with GVS, and on the other, you have the Blackpilled Natties with Revival. And I'll mostly focus today on this second group because I believe that the ideas that they embrace preferentially tend to be intellectually dishonest. They also tend to be based on resentment and very self-destructive. This shouldn't be too much of a surprise because I am a self-admitted noble natty myself. This doesn't mean that I'm not critical of my camp, but if I am in this camp, it's because I believe it's the best. I believe our ideas instead are based on pride, they're based on self-respect, and are also preferentially healthier for the community at large. So my goal today is going to be to really extend a hand to people out there who might be Blackpilled Natties to make them quote-unquote see the light using logic if possible. If you are a noble natty or you simply don't give a fuck, this is also going to be a form of roast because I'm going to be criticizing Revival's Fitness most recent Natty or Not video where he listed 10 signs that someone is clearly a fake natty. A video which I admit at first glance and for the first time you view it seems to actually be a very good video. It is full of good arguments, but if you take the time to actually look under the cover and you analyze these arguments, you'll realize that they are all actually hidden black pills. They're all designed to make you lose faith in yourself, to make you lose faith in the natty way. And this is what I want to propose to you today. I want to show you the way I examine these arguments to reveal them for what they truly are. So let's begin with the beginning. The first 15 minutes of the video, which if you haven't seen, you can go watch. It's on this channel. I think that the first 15 minutes are solid as fuck. They're full of actually really good arguments. And I think that it's good that I open with this because, as you might know, I've had past interactions with Revival Fitness which did not lead to us agreeing on much. It actually led to us being quote-unquote ideological enemies. But it doesn't stop me from admitting that the guy is not an idiot. He's able to make very good points. The few that stand out for me, for example, is the fact that there are tens of thousands of young men who are on PEDs, who are willing to sacrifice their life for this game and who still don't make it, which also points out to PED use not being a good idea for anyone. We also have the notion that natty or not are useless, which is interesting in and of itself because Revival Fitness's video is a natty or not, so this is the first contradiction and you'll see that this is not the last. And then you also have the fact that, yes, most people when they try to assess if someone is natty don't base the assessment on logic or factual points, they base it purely on whether they like this person or not. If they dislike that person, then they're not natty. And if they like this person, even if the guy is 260 lean, then he's natty. That is because most people think with their emotions, and that also includes Revival Fitness, because what I just said about natty or not, and people's assessments of natty status also applies to him, because when he decides whether or not someone is natty, he also doesn't use logic. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I will prove that to you later. So these are all the valid points that he makes, which would lead to the video potentially being good because the base of the video is good. But this is really the problem that I have with him and with his videos in general. The problem is that Revival Fitness will take something that is solid and logical and then he will use it for his own agenda. At which point he will twist logic as much as he wants. An example being that at some point Revival says that mass monsters are on a ton of juice, which is absolutely true, yes. Guys who are massive at 280, 300, even 250 lean are indeed taking a ton. And these guys also lie about their dosage, which Revival says, and he is correct. We've all seen the Dorian Yates, who claim to have taken minimal doses of test and like some compounds on the side, when we all know that the guy was blasting grams, he was taking everything under the sun because he did everything he could to win. That is purely logical. The reason why they do it is because they try to preserve their legacy. If they can convince you that they were on low doses, then they still have, in a sense, a level of credibility because it means that It's not the drugs, it's them. They're the ones who actually put in the work to get the results, which is true to some extent, but not as much as they would like you to believe. The problem is that Revival Fitness takes this, which is logically sound and correct, and he runs with it. Because he then goes on to say that since this is true that mass monsters are on a ton of shit, this must mean that there are people out there who are not mass monsters, who are much smaller, who might also be on PEDs, on low dosages, because you can be on drugs and not look good. You can be on drugs and not even look like you're on drugs. But it does not mean magically that everyone is on steroids, which is the logical misstep that Revival Fitness takes immediately afterwards because it aligns perfectly with his mentality, at which point you create a world where everyone is potentially suspicious because you've eliminated any strict criteria that would make someone enhanced. And that is an issue because this is the exact opposite of logic. It is actually the removal of logic, and it has a name. The name of this practice, this logical fallacy, is a non sequitur. It's when you go from something that is perfectly sound and reasonable, and you try to connect it with a conclusion that is not sound and reasonable, but you try to pretend it is because it's connected to a previous step that makes sense. Even if we admit that it's impossible to tell who is actually natty using hard evidence, it still does not mean that the opposite is true. Just because you cannot prove that someone isn't natty does not mean that everyone is suddenly not natty. That is a purely cynical view of the world, one that attempts to place doubt at the center of everything to the point that you now become incapable of perceiving reality because you're attempting to doubt too much. And this is the weakness of the worldview that Revival Fitness and Blackpilled Natties in general like to embrace. Instead of being realist, like they like to claim, it's their big claim to fame, they instead create a perception that is based entirely on emotions and that is devoid of logic. The issue with this cynicism being that it does the exact opposite of what it sets out to do. Instead of allowing people to see through the veil of reality, it sells them a reality that is devoid of hope, which directly encourages them to do PEDs. Because if you tell young men everyone is on PEDs, you essentially tell them everyone that you look up to that has a good physique is on drugs. And so if you want to also achieve that physique, you are going to jump on drugs. And it's something that Revival Fitness himself says in his video directly. It's not even something that he tries to hide. He straight up tells young men, if you see a dude and he looks too good to be true, it's because he's on drugs. And so you, if you want to look too good to be true, are going to have to jump on drugs. It's one thing to perceive that the fitness industry is cancerous and to diagnose it. But if the remedy you offer is just as bad and it just encourages people to take drugs, for example, then what exactly was the point of this ideology in the first place? Keep this argument in mind because it's going to be the cornerstone of my critique. That is going to start right now because we're going to begin with the first sign that someone isn't natty. The fact that they claim natty. So it's such a weird argument, but one that I hear a ton, where you have this weird catch-22 where if you claim natural, then you are not natural because clearly you're trying too hard. And if you don't claim natural, you're also not natural because you don't claim natural. It's damned if you do, damned if you don't, which should show that the argument in itself is nonsensical because if an argument is infallible, it's not because it's good. It's because it was concocted with dishonest intentions in mind. And that is revealed directly with Revival's constant conflation of fake natties and natties, because there is a difference. Yes, there are a dime a dozen assholes who put natty in their bio on Instagram, and then there are people who are calling themselves natty because they have a message to share. And I think that not being willing to admit that there is a massive difference, a difference that everyone understands between the two, is on purpose. It's a strategy put in place to be able to lump the good with the bad, which also points out to another contradiction. Because according to Revival Fitness, if you're the type of natural lifter who only uses natty as a slogan and you stop there, you don't have the ideology to back it up, then you're a piece of shit hypocrite. But if you're like me and you're natural and you preach it and you try to be an example for other people, then you're a self-righteous prick and a Puritan. So we can't win. Again, the argument is built that naturals cannot win. One way or the other, you're a piece of shit according to him. Then there's also the consideration of effectiveness, because let's say, for example, that I'm natty and I want to keep other people natty. How am I to do that? Well, I'm going to do it by creating a sense of pride, by claiming natty, and by telling other people to stay natty. So the method that would allow the highest amount of young men to stay natural is deemed as him as being a sign that people are not natural. And there is some great hypocrisy in this, because Revival claims that naturals who preach the natty way do it because they have a sense of moral superiority. But at the same time, he also clearly derives a sense of superiority from his passive stance of everyone is on. And that ties to the second sign that someone is clearly not natty, the fact that they tie PDUs and morality. I've already made 2 long-ass videos about this, where I go into detail about why Revival Fitness doesn't understand morality, why his arguments are all fallacious. If you're interested, it's in the description. If you're going to be in the description anyways, you might as well visit my Ko-fi page. It is the first link in the description. It is the only way for you guys to support the channel. If you like my work, if you like my videos, and you want them to continue, this is how it works. You can pledge $3 a month. That supports my efforts and it allows me to keep going. But to get back to the argument at hand, Revival Fitness essentially believes that people who are proud of staying natty and who preach the natty way are virtue-signaling hypocrites who are afraid of needles. That is the gist of his argument. And to me, that just shows that Revival perceives virtues as purely transactional. So he will be good and he will be virtuous only if there is something in it for him. And because he is like this, he assumes that everyone else is. So for him, apparently, pricking your butt with a needle might be something that is scary. And so he thinks that the only reason why someone would refuse to take PEDs is because of that fear and not because there is a host of logical reasons that would make it so that someone would not want to take dangerous drugs that take years of your life. Which also proves that Revival can only understand morality in the post-moral sense, meaning that he perceives morality as just an arbitrary list of rules that society selected randomly for no reason whatsoever, meaning that if you follow them, you're a sucker because they have no reason for existing. And this is something that a commenter rightly pointed out by leaving a comment that said something like, okay, well then, if taking PEDs is not bad and anyone who judges PED users for taking them is bad themselves, then this also means that if I start to kill babies and drink their blood, then you have no say or no stand to criticize me for doing it, because at the end of the day, nothing is good and nothing is bad. And naturally, Revival Fitness, being the intellectually dishonest person he is, took that argument and tried to spin it to pretend that this is somehow an actual literal belief that nobodies have. We believe that killing babies and drinking their blood is somehow just as bad as PEDs. Which shows that he's not afraid of being willfully ignorant when it serves his point. He's perfectly able to pretend to not understand logic when it allows him to paint people as religious zealots. Which, by the way, I've noticed that Revival seems to really hate religions and the church and morality and everything like this. I don't know what's going on with that. I'm just saying that it really colors all of his arguments because it means that he constantly goes against things that are for the common good, not because he's critical of them, but because he doesn't seem to believe that there's such a thing as the common good, which is exactly what this comment was trying to highlight. The guy was trying to convey the notion that certain things are good and certain things are bad and shunned by society for a reason. It's because we've all agreed that if the greatest number of people do these things, society would collapse. So it's best if everyone actually refrains. And the only way to refute this argument would be to argue that PEDs aren't actually that bad and that they're just demonized by the media for no reason, which Revival actually does. And that is another huge contradiction of his video because in the first 15 minutes, he clearly states that taking PEDs is stupid, the side effects are too dangerous, there is no point, etc., etc. Then he just turns around and says the exact opposite in the same video. And I don't think it's because Revival is stupid. I think it's because he has painted himself in a corner. Because Revival Fitness is a natural lifter, and no one doubts that. A natural lifter who for some reason decided one day to become devil's advocate and protect PED use. Which leads to the schizophrenia that is demonstrated in this video. And that, to me, is the result of two tendencies. The first one is the fact that I don't think Revival Fitness is able to play nice, just purely antagonistic, and who is only able to really exist on social media and these platforms in general by spreading as much negativity as possible. And to be clear, negativity is not a bad thing, but if your justification behind it is, I'm right, everyone else is wrong, then you are going to produce arguments that are not going to make much sense, and people are going to start noticing that clearly your only goal in having this like weird middle of the road, evil Humpty Dumpty posture is so that you can best position yourself to shit on as many people as possible. And that is the danger of being a contrarian. But the problem is that Revival would have a very tough time recovering from this mishap because now he can't really align with the natural community because it would take actually admitting that he was wrong. But he's also not going to be able to align with PED users because he's way too small for that and he doesn't have the clout to actually collab with the big names who are on drugs. So it's this horrible business decision that leads to this. And I think that he's aware of this. I think that he's perfectly aware, and this is why he's doubling down. Because now this is the only thing he has left. So now we're dealing with a guy who is trying to peddle this position as the savior of the fitness industry. Like, I'm exposing the fitness industry for what it is. I'm the only person who's telling you the truth. Keeping in mind also that this is coming from the same dude who had the balls to claim that natties have a god complex. But to go back to the idea that PEDs aren't as bad as other drugs, since this is actually an argument that I hear all the time, let me take a few moments to expose and to demonstrate why this argument stands on no legs and why PEDs are, yes, hard drugs that are just as addictive and just as destructive as other hard substances like meth. First and foremost, PEDs are addictive, and they are addictive both ways, meaning that they create a physical dependency on the user. This is demonstrated by the fact that if you take PEDs and you come off, you're going to lose the muscle that you built when you were on. You will also start to get depressed because the chemistry of your brain is affected, meaning that to get back to a normal state, an enhanced state, you're going to have to get back on the drugs, so you're physically attached to the drug, and also the fact that you get mood swings when you go off, which are going to encourage you greatly to go back on. So that is the first type of addiction. Then you have the psychological dependence. Psychological dependence is described as a substance, for example, that makes you want to get back on it to feel good. Anyone who has seen someone who's going through withdrawals, be it alcohol and be it other substances, knows that when you're in that state, the only thing you want is to get back on the substance because you are, in a sense, a hostage to it. PEDs are the exact same. I couldn't tell you the amount of time I've heard people who wanted to cycle off and do their PCT, who after 2 weeks were like, fuck it, I cannot stand it, I have to scratch the itch, I have to get back on. These are the exact same people that then do blast and cruise. Why? Because it allows them to stay on forever, meaning that yes, this is psychologically addicting. Then you also have the fact that these people will keep taking the substance even if their health declines. How many bodybuilders have gotten a doctor's note saying, hey, buddy, your blood work is fucking garbage, you're gonna die. And guess what they do? They keep taking the drugs. All of these big bodybuilders who are slimming down on TRT, they're still on the drugs. They cannot come off. I'm not even going to cite the names of the ones that died actively while on cycle, even though they knew they were gonna die. Cite me another substance that would do that. Let's say you love Twinkies, and I tell you, hey, if you don't stop eating Twinkies, you die tomorrow. I don't give a fuck how much you like the motherfuckers. You're going to stop. Why? Because they're not psychologically addicting. And then you have something also like the obsession with the substance. Look at PED users. What do they talk about? Preferentially, drug use. Why? Because they're obsessed with it. And the fact that they take larger and larger doses, which is also something you see all the time. People start with low doses. Before you know it, they take grams and grams because they cannot resist the temptation. So that is for the first factor that makes PEDs hard drugs. Every single one of these criteria is what is used to describe a hard drug. Then you have the second factor, the fact that they're dangerous. Science has shown that PEDs are responsible for organ failure, heart complications, poor blood panels, high blood pressure, cancers, etc., etc. And you could counter that by saying, well, if I take small doses, yes, refer to factors number 1. You will not be taking small doses, you will take more and more and more, and you will have to deal with these side effects. And then you have the third point, the one that makes the most sense, the fact that most PED use past a certain point is injectable, meaning you're going to have to use a syringe. Now tell me, give me an example of one thing you do in your life that includes a syringe that you use yourself that is not dangerous or somehow abnormal. Unless you're diabetic. That's right, it never fucking happens. Why? Because this is a medical procedure that is usually used within a certain structure for certain treatments. The fact that you're injecting yourself with foreign substances is the direct sign that you're doing something that is not good. These are logical arguments, and anyone who wants to argue against them can try if they want in the comments, but you're going to come short because this is based on facts. But for some reason, Revival refuses to accept this because it also allows him to stay away from the morality aspect of the question, which would then lead logically to stigmatize PED use, because if we accept that these are dangerous substances, we should discourage people from taking them. That is only logical. And the reason why he and other people do that is twofold. The first one is because, as I just explained, they think it makes them enlightened, to not stand for anything, to not stigmatize anything. That's not enlightenment. That's called being a coward. It just means and shows that you have no moral compass whatsoever, which then bleeds into number 2, the fact that a lot of the time, these very same people, these Blackpilled Natties, secretly want to get on juice. It's what we described previously with the projection with needles. These are people who hate being natural, who despise the rate of progression, they want to get enhanced, and I think that this is something that Revival has noticed, because I have noticed myself that the type of content he has been creating for the past 2 years aligns perfectly with this. He seems to be targeting a certain demographic of young men who might be incels, who might be blackpilled, who want to hear all of these things. And that is beyond hypocritical, because Revival Fitness also said that naturals who preach the natty way only do so as a way to market themselves so that they can attract people who are like-minded. What is the problem with this? If I attract people who, like me, think that it's good to be healthy and to not make completely irrational choices with their existence, then I don't see what the problem is. But there is an issue with the opposite approach, because if you refuse to stand against PEDs, that doesn't make you neutral. It means that you're either blind to a problem and you refuse to speak up, which, granted, it's your right, or you end up doing what Revival does, which is you pretend to just be non-judgmental when in reality you are feeding people exactly what they want to hear. Because what other appeal would this message have, right? Who is going to be attracted by someone who says, welcome to my community where we stand for nothing? No one. People don't vibe with this because there is nothing to vibe with. And I think that Revival is deeply aware of this, because at some point in the video, he complains that someone called him out about the jokes he makes about PED use, claiming that these are just jokes. These are not just jokes, and you know it. These participate in the normalization of PED use. All of these, trend this and deca this and test that jokes. These tell young men, hey, this is not actually a serious topic. We can have fun with this topic. And in their heads, this actually contributes to them thinking, well, PED use might not be that serious after all, because we can make jokes about it. And it is this very attitude, not the normal natties, that has created the PED boom. Again, Revival seems to believe that the moral police is somehow responsible for people going against these preachings, but that's not how humans work. Yes, some people are rebellious in nature, but in reality, what ends up leading people to making choices that are not good for them is actually the absence of prevention. And anyone who actually thinks seriously that there is more anti-PED prevention on this platform than there is promotion is full of shit. Promotion is everywhere. PED users, for by and large, promote PEDs just by existing, and that is when they don't actually promote it outright. Most natties keep their mouth shut because they're not interested in preaching the natty way. Me and people in the community who actually stand against this shit are a super minority. So when another natural goes out of his way to hunt us and say things like, well, you're actually just trying to be morally superior, this person is aligning directly with the PED boom. They can also be pointed out as actors of this PED boom, meaning that Revival's video is also hypocritical in this sense. Because why are you complaining about the results of an epidemic that you're helping? The only reason I can point to is the fact that Revival is aware of his influence. He is aware he's not making a positive change, and it pisses him off to see people who are making a positive change, so he goes after them. You have to understand one thing. I'm not a huge YouTuber by all means, okay? And I'm not pretending to be the second coming of Jesus, even though I'm starting to resemble him. But the amount of messages I get from young men who either were on juice or wanted to juice, who thank me by telling me, hey, I was on the verge, or I was like deep into addiction, and I saw one of your videos and it snapped me back to reality, and I'm finally making the right choices, too many to count. I get these messages every week, and guess what? Every single one of them is worth it. When I see these messages, I think, yeah, I'm going to keep doing this shit. I don't give a fuck how many pricks I irritate, because of course, when you stand for something, especially something that people want to do, like PEDs, people are going to get mad at you, but I don't care. Because for every person that gets mad, there is another person that takes the message to heart, understands the logic behind it, and says, you know what? This guy makes a lot of sense, let me go with what he says. What type of messages does Revival Fitness get? Because I can guarantee you that he has been responsible for people jumping on drugs. So when he points out the finger at other people like Sam Sulek saying, well, they're bad influences, you're just like them. If you're not standing against them actively, you are on their side. And that leads us to sign number 3, people who are friendly with other fake natties. So according to Revival, if you associate with PED users in any way, shape, or form, you are guilty by association, or at least guilty of being a hypocrite. And I must say that I don't really disagree with that. If you are a natty and you preach the natty way, but you still somehow find it in you to collab with some big PED user who goes out of his way to promote PEDs, there's an issue here. There's a discrepancy. There is a problem of continuity within your own principles. Now, apparently it doesn't really cause problems for some people. I know that for myself, I would never collab with a PED user. That doesn't mean that I'm going to actively hate every PED user, and it also doesn't mean that I don't understand why naturals do it. On this platform, a lot of the big names are PED users. If you want to make a name for yourself, you're going to have to shove your principles up your own ass and say, you know what, I'm going to close my eyes just for this one time, because that way I can gather clout. In a sense, there is some Machiavellian strategies going on here, because what you could also be doing is you could collab with that big PED user, get a lot of his audience to watch you, and since you're natural, you're going to get them right on the correct path. It's not something that I would be willing to do because I'm way too rigid, but I would understand that this is actually a valid method. Now, here's what I don't understand. For someone like me to dislike these practices and these natties who go against their word makes total sense. It's aligned with my morality and my values. But why does Revival Fitness have an issue with it? Because again, if we base our understanding of what is or isn't good on his own words, this means that if you're natty and you're friendly with PED users, you're a hypocrite. And if you're natty and you're not friendly with PED users, you're a self-righteous prick. Which is some serious black and white thinking. For someone who apparently hates the good versus evil dichotomy, Revival sure does seem to do a lot of it. Another example of this seemingly incomprehensible logic is the fact that Revival claims that natties who like anime are hypocrites because the characters they like would be on PEDs in the real world. Several things. First and foremost, anime is not real life. So the consequences of the physiques of the characters isn't really that relevant because they don't actually exist. I know, shocker. And that also proves that he doesn't understand why noble natties don't like PED users. We don't dislike them because they're bigger than us. That would be a shitty reason based on envy. We dislike them because by and large, PED users are liars and they're bad role models. It's not the way they look that disturbs us. It's what they do with the influence they get from the drugs that they use to get these physiques. So, if you have an anime character, like in Baki for example, who would not be possible natty in real life, It changes absolutely nothing as long as the message conveyed by the character is healthy. Which also means that, yes, there could exist PED users who, shocker, give good advice and who are good people. They exist. John Meadows was one. Great advice for natural lifters, tremendous guy with a heart of gold. But we have other examples. I personally was a huge fanboy for Rich Piana, and you could tell me, Rich Piana? That's not a good role model. It is a good role model because it was an example of someone who is living his life in a completely destructive way, but who was honest about it. Actually honest, not I'm taking small dosages and it's actually healthy honest. More like I'm doing coke off a hooker's fucking backside and I'm going to die in my 40s honest. And he paid the price for it, and I appreciate him for it because he's one of the reasons why today I can still claim to be natural, because he made me realize that there was no point in taking PEDs. And for the same reason, this doesn't mean that being natty automatically makes you a good influence. You can be natty and be a total piece of shit. It's all about the message that you convey. So that's for the morality part of this video. 2 years ago, I already said that Revival Fitness needed to stay far away from moral philosophy because he understands nothing of it, and 2 years later, nothing has changed. Let's look instead at the visual factors that make people fake natties. Are these better? Sign number 4, as I said, is people who get eye-popping results fast. On the basis of the argument, I agree. Time frame is one of the biggest indicator of drug use. If you have a guy who from age 16 to 18 transforms into Hulk, that's usually a dead giveaway that the guy was using, even if he has godlike genetics, because genetics don't build muscle without effort, you still have to put in the time. Someone with tremendous genetics will get there faster, but he's not going to fucking speedrun it and get 10 years worth of result in 2. That can only be done with drugs. However, I want to make clear that what constitutes eye-popping results is 100% subjective, something that many people don't seem to get. My standards, for example, for hypertrophy and size are extremely high. The majority of people that I see in my gym, in everyday life, even on the internet, don't really raise an eyebrow for me because I look at them and I think, okay, that looks achievable or reasonable to me. Why? Because I've been doing it for a long time. My standards have been pushed with my experience and my own achievements. Example, if I see someone who has 18 inches arms, I will not think, that's impossible naturally, you must be on drugs, because I've achieved that. So I think, oh, damn, you have the same results I have and I'm mediocre. So that's perfectly normal. Meaning also that if someone has 19 inches arms after 15 years of training, I'll think, damn, good job, bro, you're an example of what I can accomplish one day. But that is because I understand perspective. Revival clearly doesn't. Revival seems to believe that his opinion is the gold standard, that he is right and everyone else is wrong. But what he fails to understand is that in terms of experience, Revival Fitness is an intermediate. So he has the judgment capabilities of an intermediate, which is something that he says in his video where he tells people, well, if you're small and skinny, then keep your mouth shut because you don't know enough to speak. Can't I use the same argument for him? I'm bigger than the guy. I have like 30 pounds on the guy. Can I say, okay, shut the fuck up until you get to my level? And then can someone who is bigger than me tell me the same thing? Because if we work like this, then no one is right? It's a constant battle of who has the biggest dick. Instead, you have to just accept that you can only look down based on the height where you stand. And actually, if your height is not super high and you have to look up, you're going to think, well, I'm looking up, so this guy must be cheating. But that could also be just explained by the fact that the guy has been climbing for longer than you, or simply that he is a better climber than you are. Knowing also that it is very possible that this very same person who makes that claim will eventually get to a point where they get just as big as the guy they used to hate on. At which point, what happens? Are you a reverse fake natty? Are you pinning in your sleep? What happened? You managed to catch up. So what now? The standards evolved and now it's okay, now it's naturally achievable? This is the issue with this entire mindset. It makes no sense. And because it makes no sense, the people that think like this also produce some pretty ignorant statements that show that they don't know as much as they should. So for example, Revival says that someone who is gaining while cutting is a sign of someone on drugs. What he fails to understand is that the majority of people who gain while cutting don't actually gain. They only look bigger, but on the scale, in terms of muscle mass, they're losing. You cannot look at pictures and based on the pictures say, well, this guy must be He must have put on 5 pounds. Case in point, look at me now. I'm sitting in a chair. I don't look impressive at all. And I get that comment all the time. We all do. No pump, with a shirt. You would never guess I'm 220. You would never be able to tell how I look when I'm standing up with a pump. Why? Because that's just social media. It's the reality of the way you portray yourself on social media. If I lose 20, 30 pounds and I get a pump and I get a tan and I pose, I'll get people saying, oh, dude, you got bigger. No, I didn't. Actually, I'm much smaller than I used to be, but it's smoke and mirrors. And I know that this is something that pisses Revival off because he repeats several times in the video that he is tired of individuals who tell him that someone cannot be assessed because of pump, lighting, and angle. But these people are absolutely correct. There are so many factors that influence the way you look. Height is a huge one. Body fat percentage is also a huge one. I have a friend at the gym I train at who is going to do his first show, okay? The guy is 145. 145. Like, many people say, 145? Do you even fucking live, bro? The guy looks like a Greek motherfucking god. He's peeled, veins everywhere. And I can vouch for the guy being natty because when I look at him, yeah, sure, he looks good, but he's not so impressive that I would think, oh, that's not possible naturally. And the beautiful thing is that this guy is going to win his fucking class because he's going to show up on stage and in perspective, in comparison with the other guys, he is simply going to look better. Why? Because he has understood how bodybuilding fucking works. If I showed up on stage right now, the judges would be like, could we get the turkey off the stage, please? Because Thanksgiving is in 6 months. We don't need you up here now. Thank you very much. You can wait backstage. Because I'm fat as fuck. Compared to like bodybuilding standards, I am fat as fuck. So yes, all of these factors that Revival doesn't want to hear about anymore need to be taken into account because they make a massive difference. Something that he should know, because when he posts pictures of himself, does he post pictures without a pump, with the worst lighting possible? Fuck no. He takes pictures that some people would point out and say, hey, that's enhanced, bro. You cannot possibly be natty. At which point, what do? Why don't these people have a say in this? Why couldn't they be correct? Because they're not you? Because they're smaller than you? As I've demonstrated properly, this mindset leads nowhere because there's always a bigger fish. And then there's another issue. If this entire portrayal thing is not real, can someone explain to me why Revival Fitness spent the entirety of the fucking video like this? The guy spent the video with his shoulders flared out, with his traps in this position. You can't fool me, motherfucker. I know every single trick. You cut off your arms from the frame so that no one can see that you're like this. How long did you record in that position? That's so uncomfortable. I get it. When you're staying like this relaxed, you don't look that good or that big. But shit, to take it to this point, I have bad body dysmorphia and it doesn't even come close to yours. So before giving people advice on natty or not, maybe get that fixed. But we're not here to offer Revival a free therapy session. So we're going to move on to sign number 5, the fact that the person is lean year-round. Again, technically correct, but the issue is that Revival manages to fuck it up by adding his cynical twist and claiming that even if someone isn't that big, it doesn't prove that they're natural. So we're going right back to the everyone is on PEDs shtick. It's hyper convenient because now he can claim that everyone is on even if you don't look like you're on, which is awfully convenient because that way he can be the only real natty. I'm the only real natty guy, everyone else is on PEDs, listen to me. Sure, absolutely. I'm sure that there are people who fall for this bullshit, and it's also very popular for natties to claim this. It's also pathetic. Especially when you use fucking Alex Eubank as an example of someone who is in enhanced territory. Like, I don't hate the guy, and he has a good physique, very aesthetic, but I can tell you one thing. If you met the guy in real life, in a gym environment, you would not look twice at the dude. Because dudes like this are a dime a fucking dozen. 170 pounds with a six-pack and like somewhat capped shoulders? Yeah, 20-year-olds in my gym, all day, every day. And there's nothing wrong with that, because when I was their age, I was much smaller than that. So kudos to them. But I can also tell you that I never actually look at them thinking, wow, what a big dude. I think, oh, that's a guy who has a good base, and if he keeps going, he's going to look really impressive in 4, 5, 6 years. And I'm certain that to that, Revival Fitness would say, well, you can never truly know. That's true. But if you have bought into the notion that a physique like Alex Eubank is not achievable naturally, quit. quit, go play table tennis. You are so black-pilled that you're never going to achieve anything because your standards are at the fucking bottom of the barrel. And this aligns also with the fact that when trying to find an example of someone who is unattainably lean, Revival Fitness picked Ziz. Ziz, the guy that we now pretty much all agree was such a fuck up that he managed to juice like a pig and still not even look enhanced. Because save for a few pictures, if you look at some videos of Ziz when he was on, the guy wasn't very impressive. He was like 6'1", 180, something like this, in these like territories, 180, 190. There are natural lifters who reach this level of physiques without any drugs. But the reason why Revival used Ziz is because by lowering the standards, by picking the dude, it can also allow him to then point out at anyone who is remotely close to Ziz in terms of muscle, saying, well, Ziz could only do it on drugs, so no one can do it without drugs. That also makes no sense whatsoever. It is, again, this non sequitur I described at the start of the video, so I'm not going to insist too much on that. Because there is another thing that personally jumped at me when I watched the video, and it's the fact that clearly a lot of the arguments were based on resentment. To me, it shows that Revival is just someone who is deeply jealous of all of these aesthetic bros who have this party lifestyle and who get laid. Meaning that the video in itself wasn't really created to help people spot fake natties. It was just a way for him to just download all of his hatred and his desire and envy onto the internet. And granted, it worked because there are a lot of people who are just like him, envious little turds who perfectly vibe with that nonsense. And that is, by the way, why Natty or Nuts are stupid. It's not because they're based on complete fallacies or because the people that produce them are bad influencers themselves and should really shut their mouth. Instead, it's because the content itself produces nothing good. Because what exactly is a Natty or Nut teaching you? To spot fake natties? Is that your job? Do you go from locker room to measure the balls of men and say, the size of a tangerine? Not natty, not at all. What the fuck is this? Why do you waste your time with that nonsense? Well, I'll tell you why. It's because these are people who are looking for an out for their insecurities and their feelings of inadequacy. Instead of accepting that it's on them and they have to fix themselves, no. They're going to point the finger at this guy and this guy saying, well, this guy is on PD and he is clearly the reason why I don't feel good about myself. So I'm going to, instead of taking responsibility for myself, lay the blame on the guy's shoulders. And that is not going to help because you're just going to feed your own obsession with these types, which then in return gives them power to influence more young men. And that is something that we see also with sign number 6 and 7 that were directly targeted at the Gymshark community, the Gymshark influencers, the ones that ruined my generation. Because they're the fake natties of my generation. Ziz was a little bit too early for me. I only caught the end of Ziz. For me, it was the David Lay, the McKennas, all of these dudes were my age when I started lifting. So they were the ones that should have turned me into a black-pilled lifter. But the question that I have for him and for other people is, why do you consume their content? Because I get that the algorithm just shows you these things, these influencers, because they're around your age and so you get sucked into it and maybe you're too dumb at the time to realize. But once you have the knowledge to know that these people are full of shit, why do you keep consuming their content? Revival Fitness was saying that he was scrolling through like endless pages of fake natties on his Instagram. Why? That's a choice. You're on purpose exposing yourself to these people. My Instagram feed is cats, posts about politics, and sometimes I have things about friends. That's pretty much that. Because the algorithm is a mirror. It feeds you what you click on. So if you times and times again click on fake natties, guess what? It's going to show you more fake natties. Which is why it makes me laugh when I hear especially young men who say, oh, all influencers suck. Every influencer suck. No, you suck. You are shown sucky influencers who are liars because that is what you reflect. That is what the algorithm thinks that you like. There are tons of very small channels on this platform of dedicated natties who give tremendous advice who get 1,000 fucking views on their videos. So don't sit there and say, well, it's the community, man. You are the community. You are the environment. You feed the toxicity. You could choose to feed the healthy side instead, and you decide not to. It's on you. Then we have sign number 8, and this one is when we start getting into the actual training principles and when we start to see how little Revival Fitness knows about fitness. Because so far he's not living up to his name or to the description of his channel. So, sign number 8, sorry for the tangent, is someone who is big but weak. So in this segment, Revival tells us that everyone should intuitively understand that getting stronger automatically makes you bigger, and that training for hypertrophy is a term coined by nerds that has nothing to do with reality and that takes people away from what really matters, which is, of course, getting stronger on the big three. Now, before I actually destroy this argument, I want to point out something very interesting that you might have noticed if you have watched this video. Notice how often Revival Fitness repeats that certain things are intuitive and how you should just know. Saying, for example, well, this guy is clearly not natty, you should just be able to tell. And if you're not able to tell, then this means that you're simply an idiot because you don't agree with me, of course. That is also a very frequent logical fallacy known as an appeal to reason fallacy that people use when they cannot produce a logical argument to back up their claim, which is characteristic of the way Revival Fitness argues. He claims that the arguments he makes are logical, but if you actually look at the logic behind the arguments, it can always be summed up by "because I said so." And that is best explained by the fact that, a lot of the time, when Revival makes a claim, that claim is not based on logic, it's based on emotion. It's based on the way he feels about a certain topic. After that, he will take that emotion and he will boil it up with logic, which are really just fallacies, and he will present it to his audience. An audience that tends to share the same emotions and therefore will not actually observe the object and the item they were just presented with. They will take it at face value, which is also something that he says a lot in his videos. Oh, you guys take everything at face value. You are training people to do that with the way you argue. The funniest thing being that he sort of admits it himself unwillingly, because when he says that something should be intuitively true, he doesn't seem to understand what intuition is. Because the definition of intuition is the ability to understand something without the need for conscious reasoning. So that's a pretty hefty Freudian slip here. And talking about Freudian slip, it has nothing to do with the video, but I have to say it here because it pisses me off personally. Revival Fitness has also a specialty, and that is to misuse psychology terms that he then turns and weaponizes against the people that disagrees with him. So things like cope, things like projection. If you disagree with him, or you're just copying, or you're just projecting, bro. That is typical of anti-intellectualism. And it actually aligns perfectly with something that Jung used to say, where he deplored the fact that psychology is a mirror that was offered to humanity. But unfortunately, while some people use that mirror for introspection to become better, others break it down on the floor and use the shards to stab other people with. And that is Revival Fitness to a T. But it's not enough to tell you that there is no logic behind Revival's arguments, because if I just stopped there, I would be just as bad as him. So right now what I'm going to do is I'm going to offer tangible arguments to you that you can observe with your own eyes. So let's back to this idea that someone who is weak but big would therefore qualifies as a fake natty. The first problem with this notion is the fact that Revival bases it on a straw man, or rather a reverse straw man, because he opens the argument by saying that anyone who says that powerlifters are small are themselves making a straw man, because this isn't based on reality. And that actually is correct, because powerlifters aren't actually small. If you put me next to a powerlifter that is my height and my weight, we're going to look roughly the same size, which is great because no one actually argued against it. The argument was never powerlifters are small. The argument was powerlifters are small for their strength, and the size they built off of that strength is highly specific, meaning that their physiques tend to be imbalanced. So they're going to have very big legs, they're going to have very big chest, front delt, they're going to have massive traps, they're going to have all of the muscles that grow via the big three, and then they're going to have glaring weak points. Stuff like the arms are going to be underdeveloped, small muscles of the back, etc., etc. So that's one reverse strawman out of the way. Then there is the second one. The notion that people claim that there are tons of bodybuilders who are super weak, but also super big at the same time. And likewise, I've never really heard anyone say that. What people say rather is that bodybuilders will be weaker than people who specialize for strength even at the same weight. It essentially means that if we put these two groups, the bodybuilders and the powerlifters, on the same spectrum, you'll have people who will preferentially be stronger than others, and you'll have people who will be preferentially weaker. And if we compare the two in terms of size, we'll find that some of them will be weak for their size, the bodybuilders, and some of them will be strong for their size, the powerlifters. And since, as Revival himself pointed out, genetics cannot account for this standard deviation, this means that there must be another factor that explains it. And that other factor is simple, it's training parameters. Meaning that the way people train directly explains where they fall on the spectrum, which also therefore proves that there must exist a difference between strength and hypertrophy training. So you see the problem when you're not actually using logic to back up your arguments? They end up backfiring against you. And Revival's attempt at proving that the argument is actually correct does nothing to help because he just digs his own grave. This is why this video is really a masterclass in thinking properly. Because if you think, okay, I want to be right, I want this statement to be right, but you create the statement before you look into the logic behind it, what you'll do is you'll stack arguments to back up a statement that is false to start with. So every single argument that will follow will also be fallacious, as we see here. So the first argument that Revival uses to try and prove his point is the fact that there are IFBB pros who lift heavy weights on the big three, which to him shows that size and strength training are essentially the same. And there are two immediate problems with it, ones that I'm certain that you have already pinpointed. The first one being that if you have watched his video, you have seen that the men that Revival selected tended to be in the 250 to 70 weight class, and they were lifting like 600 pounds on the deadlift, which comparatively to their size is weak because there are powerlifters who are 160 who can lift that. So by using that example, he proved the exact opposite of the point he was trying to make. And then you have point number two, which is obvious. He used IFBB pros that he then claims got big off of 1 rep maxes. That goes against everything that he said previously in the video. We have established already that these people don't get big strictly off of their training. They get big mostly off the drugs. So comparing the results they might have gotten with a strength-oriented technique for hypertrophy is completely asinine. A good counter-argument to prove that hypertrophy training is nonsense would have been, for example, to produce natural powerlifters who rival natural bodybuilders in terms of size, balance, and aesthetic. Because that would demonstrate, therefore, that yes, hypertrophy training is complete bogus. But of course, he didn't do that because that would be impossible. It would be just as impossible as if I asked you to produce natural bodybuilders who somehow outlift powerlifters on the big three. Yeah, you'll find very strong natural bodybuilders, but none that will actually outlift people who train for strength. For the simple reason that these aren't the same qualities. So if you specialize in one, the other is going to suffer automatically. Which is also something that Revival Fitness goes out to prove afterwards, because he claims that Arnold and Ronnie were also powerlifters. In his brain, I think that it meant, oh, look, it's my gotcha moment. It proves that these dudes trained for strength and got massive and won IFBB titles in bodybuilding. But there's an issue. How did they train when they competed in powerlifting? And how did they train when they competed in bodybuilding? Did they train the exact same? Yeah, sure, Ronnie was doing heavy deadlift, heavy squat, heavy bench when he was bodybuilding. But did he do a majority of it? Did the majority of his program hinge on these factors? No, and Arnold is even worse. Arnold deadlifted, sure, he benched, sure, he squatted, sure. But look at the volume he did outside of that. That represented maybe 5% of his volume, maybe. So I hope you agree with me that I've presented fairly logical arguments here that also prove that Revival's argument, which are the exact opposite of mine, are therefore, by definition, illogical. But how can we explain this? Is it just because Revival is a complete fucking moron? No, I don't think so. I think that he has a much bigger problem going on. Revival is someone who likes strength. He likes to max out. maybe because it bolsters his ego or for other reasons, it really doesn't matter. But the problem is that instead of just saying, I like strength and I don't care if it's detrimental for hypertrophy, which would be 100% fine, you do whatever you want, he tries instead to force his method to align with what's optimal for hypertrophy. Which leads to a way of thinking that is extremely prevalent in toddlers, where instead of trying to make your viewpoint fit reality, you bend reality to fit your viewpoint. And this is a tendency that I've noticed times and times again with dudes that I call the strength coppers. Strength coppers are not people who love strength, they're not powerlifters or strongmen. They're people who deep down want aesthetics, but for some reason who have convinced themselves that the only way to achieve this is to just get stronger. So get strong to get big, something that you've heard a million times. And the thing that these guys also all have in common is that they're all intermediates. Because this powerlifting obsession is really a trap. And it's a trap that I fell into. I was that guy. I was that guy obsessed with the big three, obsessed with strength, obsessed with maxing out, and it led me nowhere. Revival Fitness is where I was 5 years ago. He is where GVS was 5 years ago. So when he then turns around and starts hating on these people, GVS in particular, because apparently they're not training the right way and how could they get results by not doing what I do? It's because they were you. They were you, motherfucker, and they saw the problems with their ways and they fixed it and they got better results from it. And that doesn't mean, by the way, that there is no cross-pollination between the two. Because naturally, strength and size are going to coincide at some point, which is why all the big natties are decently strong. But see, here's the thing. They're decently strong on everything, not just the big three. They might not even do the big three because the big three might not be the best for hypertrophy. You take someone like GVS. People love to say GVS is weak. Yeah, sure. His bench and his squat suck. His deadlift is pathetic. But what about the rest? What about his bicep isolation, his tricep isolation, his shoulder strength? What about all of the fucking back movements he does? That doesn't count? See, this is the issue. These people obsess over what they call strength, when in reality, it's like 1/10 of all of the strength potential in the human body. And GVS is not even at the top of the pyramid. He would tell you that himself. There are other natural bodybuilders that would blow your mind with their physique. Erzoviak is a good example. Are these people suddenly not natural because they're better than me? What type of pathetic fucking viewpoint is this? Everyone who is bigger must be cheating? No. Accept that you might just be average. I've accepted it. I'm average. Being average is great. My muscles still grow, it just takes me longer. But if you allow the pettiness to become a part of your personality and you allow the jealousy to color your viewpoint, you're going to become like this. You're going to become blackpilled, you're going to start lowering your standards, artificially thinking nothing is possible and the best I can hope for is like some mediocre results. And this is the issue with his ideology. The signs he presents to spot a fake natty aren't bad or wrong, they're just so vague that they can be really applied to anyone because they're not based on logic. They're based on a willingness to destroy, a willingness to put down other people. And sign number 10 is the perfect example. He ends the video on this. Anyone who can gain from their fitness, their presence on social media in fitness must be enhanced. Great. That's 100% of people. Excellent criteria. That way we can take our brains and shut it off and we can just completely disregard logic and we can just be cynical assholes who believe in nothing. Which to me is directly opposed with a healthy community because you cannot build anything healthy if your main driver in life is resentment. It's simply not possible. And that is best demonstrated by the last barb that I have for this video. The fact that times and times again in his own segment, Revival Fitness uses quotes from Dom Mazzeri to ridicule noble natties, without realizing that Dom is a caricature. He represents a natty lifter who is envious of PD users because he is insecure as a man, even though his lack of gains are perfectly explained by his own flawed character and unwillingness to reflect on his own ways. The only difference being that Dom Mazzeri is a character. And the fact that Revival Fitness didn't seem able to understand this says a lot about the quality of the content that he can offer this natural community. So if you want to follow him, that is your choice, I'm not your dad. And I do think that he has his place and he has things to offer. but I also believe that the path he's going down to is not going to be beneficial for him, and it's not going to be beneficial for his audience, something that I think is going to be demonstrated in the future. And I'm going to leave you with that. If you enjoyed this video, again, you can support the channel on the first link in the description. I'm going to see you very soon. Have a good night.